No worries.
All right, welcome back to another episode of Fastlane Founders with me, Greg Keel. We're here with James Bates today. He's got some super awesome stuff going over at Advent now, and he's a little farther along than most of the folks that I interview. So we're gonna have a great conversation. Welcome, James.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Greg. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Definitely. So, where'd you come from? Obviously, you're in medical. You've got college behind you. You've probably got a lot of other, cool experiences. What kind of led you to starting Advent now?
Well, I guess I'll walk through a little bit of my history because that kind of builds up to it. But out of school, I joined Bell Laboratories, and for those of you who don't know, Bell Labs was the research center underneath AT&T back when it was a monopoly, and had the opportunity to invent things like IP protocol for the internet, radar technologies, and I was part of the GPRS chipset design team. So we developed the world's first digital cell phone chipset. And out of school, I had the opportunity to do that. They sent me to Japan, and I was in Japan for a few years. I'm working with, at the time in the 90s, the largest digital cell phone company in the world, which was NEC, to adopt this chipset. And from there, I joined a startup named Silicon Labs, had the opportunity to found the international operations for them. We grew from zero to $500 million of revenue over the space of just 3 years. And then right now, actually, Silicon Labs is in the process of being sold to Texas Instruments for 8 billion. Nice, good transaction size for that company. And they're on their way out. I left Silicon Labs though after 6 years of being with them and joined Maxim. At Maxim, I was in charge of the Internet of Things activities there. Our focus was small size, high precision, and low power. So anything that connects to the internet that measures the real world, stuff like the Apple Watch, your cell phones, Fitbits, Nest thermostats, anything like that, I had the opportunity to be part of. And then I moved to Arizona, took over the operations of a company named Freescale, which was one Motorola Semiconductor before that, and had the opportunity to work on self-driving vehicle technologies. So we made the technologies that Tesla uses, the technologies that Google Waymo, Daimler, GM, Toyota, basically any car that does auto brake or auto steer uses our technology. And then we sold that business. And part of that selling, nice $28 billion transaction, Freescale to NXP. Part of that was a very strict non-compete that I had on me. And so it was the type of non-compete where you can do anything you want in this world as long as it's something that you've never done before, type of thing. Well, I'd never done healthcare really. And so I figured I'm going to learn about healthcare. I will go out, I will acquire medical practices, I will roll them up and kind of get to know healthcare by essentially owning medical businesses. And the more I dug into it, I looked at the profit and loss of all of these things and I kind of dug into it. And I was shocked at how terrible those businesses were. For those of you that don't know, medical practices average low single digit net profit. Essentially, no profit is left in the business itself. And so, what that means is the business entity has zero value because the doctors carry all the risk of the business. And so they don't make enough money to have value as a business. And so I was shocked by this. I thought there's so much money in healthcare, yet hospitals don't make money, doctors' offices don't make money. How is it that nobody makes money,
Hmm.
but we're spending so much money? That just doesn't make any sense. So I actually did what was called a Six Sigma lean analysis on a practice group, dug in extreme detail to kind of figure out why they don't make money. Well, through this process, literally walked in the clinic with a stopwatch, measured the movements of every single person in the practice, did that time and motion study, and then correlated each cost line item to outcomes that the practice is trying to achieve. And I took very broad buckets as the outcomes. I said, hey, number one, I want positive outcomes for the patient. Everything that relates to that, we'll put it in that bucket. Number two, the doctor wants to be paid for every single visit that they see. Every patient that walks through the door, they want to get paid. And so Getting paid reliably and consistently, bucket number two. And then you don't want to get sued for doing it, right? And bucket number three. And so I went through that process and then realized that physicians were spending 70% of their time trying to get paid and not get sued, and only 30% of their time practicing medicine.
Hmm.
And the odd thing is that physicians spend 12 years of their life going to school to practice medicine, yet they're only doing that for 30% of their day. So, what do I do today? Which I think was how the question started out. We completely automate the medical practice to enable physicians to practice medicine for almost 100% of their time.
Wow, that is fascinating, and it makes sense because I've got some doctors in my extended family and some nurse practitioners, and there's so much nonsense that they deal with as the owners of the practices, and it's just really awesome how you went from this other industry, right, where you were clearly successful in, and kind of took all those experiences and process understandings and applied it to something where it sounds like it's pretty profitable. Am I right?
It does pretty good. Absolutely.
So what kind of experience did you have, once you figured out this problem and started, working to solve it? What was the timeline like? What was the experience like getting, the people involved, the doctors in these practices? How did you align all of the people stuff involved with that and egos and all that?
Well, I don't know if you could ever align a doctor's ego for anything, but um, the reality is that pre-ChatGPT, you go to a doctor and you say, we're going to use AI to automate the medical practice. All kinds of guardrails go up, right? They're like, wait a minute, AI, and all they think about is Skynet and Terminator and, the world ending and them being automated out of a job. And, and, obviously that's not what we do. We don't replace doctors. We allow them to actually do what they like to do and then make them very profitable. So initially, before ChatGPT came about, it was a challenging thing to convince them that AI could actually do what we say it can do. They had to try it and see it in order to convince them. Well, when ChatGPT came out and anyone could just ask it anything and kind of get a response that's maybe not 100% right, but maybe, 70, 80% right, it became amazing. They were there like, hey, we have no choice but to adopt it. This is the way the world's going. And then at the same time, the regulatory agencies, especially when the pandemic hit, the requirements to write detailed notes and actually to practice whole health or treat the patients for everything about them every time they come to the doctor went up so dramatically in order for them to get paid and not get sued that doctors would just feel completely overwhelmed. And so they're at the point where they're quitting medicine because they don't want to deal with 80 to 90% of their time trying to get paid and not get sued. And so people are running to AI like crazy right now. And we basically have more demand than we can handle. It's an amazing time to be an AI vendor that actually has a mature solution that the clients can adopt.
Totally. So what kind of tools, AI tools, are you able to insert into these businesses that automate these processes?
Yeah, so AdviNow has two applications. We have a patient-facing application and then a doctor-facing application. The patient-facing application is essentially very similar to what patients use today. I mean, so when you go into the doctor's office, usually you get a link a few days before the visit. You got to click on the link, you got to sign the documents. They want to have your insurance information, all that they want you to get done before you arrive at the practice, right? That's the goal. Well, AdviNow does that too, but we take it a step further. The AI actually does a comprehensive review of all of the patient records. Then the AI will predict every single question the doctor's going to ask and ask it to the patient before they ever come to the doctor's office. The AI will then predict everything the insurance company wants to know for any images or labs or anything that the doctor may want to order to complete a diagnosis. Then the AI will predict a diagnosis, and it will predict a treatment plan, and it will determine if the insurance company is going to pay for that. And it will mitigate non-payment by collecting more information and potentially coming up with a different treatment that the insurance company will actually pay for. All of that information is prepped before the doctor ever sees the patient. And so by the time the patient arrives at the clinic, they have all of their labs, images, everything is taken immediately. They don't need to see the doctor first, sit in the waiting room, wait for the nurse to come back to take the lab. All of that kind of process just gets short circuited. Once they arrive, they take the images, they take the labs, they're ready to see the doctor. And the doctor comes in with all the information that they need to do a physical exam and then have a diagnosis and treatment conversation with the patient, looking them in the eye rather than their head buried in the computer. And so the doctor application is embedded inside of the software that they use today. So most medical practices use what's called an electronic medical record or an electronic healthcare record inside the practice. AdviNow software embeds inside of that. And so we create a one-page summary that gives a doctor everything they need to know to diagnose and treat the patient. That one-page summary gives them a list of symptoms, potential illnesses, diagnoses, treatments, and flags whether the insurance company will most likely pay for it or not. The physician can then have the conversation with the patient, and all they need to do is click a diagnosis. Once they do that, the AI codes it, scribes it, and gets it ready for billing. And the doctor can just talk with the patient, say, hey, here's a diagnosis, here's a treatment we decided. That's all they got to do. They walk out of the room, see the next patient, and start over again. No documentation required. All the information they need is right there. And to the patient, they don't even know they're engaging with the AI. They're thinking it's the same type of software they use today. To the doctor, everything is done for them. So it's like they have a superhuman pre-doctor that does everything for them. And now they can just have the real-time conversation and make the decision about what's best for this patient, given their condition, given what their insurance company is willing to do, and given their ability for cash pay, if they so want to go that route. Instead of prescribing something, they get back, the insurance company says, yeah, you don't get a GLP-1. We're only giving you metformin for your diabetes. So the patient just spent weeks waiting for some conclusion that never happened. And then they got to go back to the doctor, figure out what else they're going to do for their diabetes. All of that happens up front. So it really makes it easy for the physician to practice medicine. It takes them out of the game of giving the patient bad news that, hey, the insurance company isn't paying for this, even though we prescribed it to you.
Wow. And yeah, as you're talking about that, I'm thinking about my experience at doctor's offices, right? I go in, I sit there for 40 minutes to get in the back door. I sit there, wait for a medical assistant to come take some, tests and talk to me for 10 minutes about things. And then 45 minutes later, the doctor comes in and they ask me all the same questions because they never even saw what they were looking at before. And I can see how, all of this being A, centralized, but B, automated. I mean, I'm sure it reinvents every single practice you're in.
It totally makes a difference. I mean, for practices that adopt our solution, profitability goes from net 3% on average. I mean, think about that. Doctors' offices are making 3% profit. Most charities make a higher profit than doctors' offices. As an example, the Red Cross makes an average of about 5% profit on everything they do. They take in donations, they buy things, they give them away, and they pay their staff. And they have about a 5% profit, a very small profit, but doctors' offices make less. So they're actually run like nonprofits. But that 3% profit after AdviNow is adopted goes to over 30%. So it's dramatically different growth in profitability.
Wow, I can imagine that these practices really like you.
Once they adopt us, we're the best thing since sliced bread. That's for sure.
So how many of these practices across the country are you guys currently serving?
We're just starting our ramp. We're in 56 practices, and that's what gives us the metrics of revenue per doctor doubling, revenue per patient going up 20%, profitability spiking 1,000%, right? And so that's where we get those type of numbers from. The beautiful part is we have over 1,000 practices signed up to use us. And so now it's just a matter of us scaling and growing so that we can onboard those practices that are waiting to go live.
Oh, that's a good problem to have. So when you so talking about the entrepreneurial journey, right? You go from idea and zero to one. First question is, how did you get from zero to one?
Well, we were AI before AI was cool. So we actually had to invent a lot of the core technology to get this up and running. So we had to develop our own language models, read peer-reviewed literature, created a knowledge graph that correlates the symptoms to illnesses, illness treatments, treatments to outcomes. That knowledge graph drives our ability to assist the diagnosis and treatment of patients and become what's called a decision support tool. That is the most important part of our product. Then we had to develop what we call the payer engine, where we're predicting if the insurance company is going to pay for it or not. And we had to predict the liability engine, which we're predicting if the doctor is going to get sued. And so from that standpoint, developing that technology took, about 5 years and getting that right and getting us to be able to deploy. So that was one heck of a long journey getting there. And then after we got it ready, we had to basically figure out how to onboard practices going from a completely manual practice to a completely automated practice. That onboarding process is also non-trivial. And so that's actually what we're solving now. We're releasing to the market here in Q4 what we call one-click onboarding, and that actually enables a practice, if they're using the Athena Health EMR, to essentially click on a button and start using AdviNow almost immediately. And so that is the next great thing in this journey that we're on.
Yeah, no, that's really cool stuff. And so how long did it take you to get from one to where you guys are at now?
So this round, it's taken us about 2 years. Now we probably have another 6 months before we can honestly say that we're at full scale mode, as we automate the onboarding process.
Yeah, well, I mean, with what you just described to me, I think onboarding and scale is going to be a much more scalable venture now that you can click a button and go. I'm
Totally.
I'm sure there's a ton of work going in those first 57, to get everybody lined up. But once you get kind of the point where doctors and practices and customers in general can look at other businesses that are running this, that's when, I learned that in fundraising and education. Like once people are able to ask other people and then it changes everything.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely.
So let's talk about team. How big was your team in that 5 years that you were developing this?
It varied, well, everywhere from, me, myself, and I being a big team, all the way up to over 100 people at its peak. So we were ramping heavily and trying to get everything ready. And that, that had to be scaled back down once the pandemic hit. But that leads to where we are today, where we're sitting probably at about 25, 30 people.
And how'd you go from like a lot of CEOs, they start off and they got a couple people to deal with, and as they grow, what kind of dynamics, have you noticed in that growth in employees, and what kind of skills and experiences can you kind of relay to others who are scaling, that employee growth?
Well, as you hire employees, in a startup, many times you're asking them to take compressed salaries, from a cash standpoint, and equity as part of their compensation package. And so you can only hire certain types of people. People who are willing to take a risk, they don't have big mortgages and big car payments that they need a certain amount of cash for. And so it's very interesting, to get those people. Now they're usually very loyal. They buy into the vision. You got to be able to recruit them and get them going, and we're taking mutual risk together. Well, as you grow, then you transition from those people to, people who would potentially would go work for Google or Amazon or Microsoft, you know, work, and they have that pedigree and that capability. And then you have to convince them that, hey, you're stable. And by the way, we're still not going to pay you the same amount as the big boys, but we'll give you market competitive salaries, and you get this nice compensation package with a tremendous upside. And those people come in with a different professionalism usually, than the first class, that you hire. And so as you're going through that transition, every single startup that I'm aware of, has difficulty trying to mature the loyalists because you don't want to do them wrong, right? But at the same time, you have to run a mature operation. And so you try to mature the loyalists, get the ones and first you get people, to get the right people on the bus, then you got to put the people in the right seats on the bus. And that always takes a little bit of massaging, and, it's never smooth. And I'd have to say it wasn't smooth for me either as we were going through the process. Because, you really have deep relationships with the people who've gone through the battles with you in the early days, and you want to make sure that they have a vested interest in going forward as well. So outside of those kind of hiccups, that team management, is relatively straightforward. I mean, in my career, I've done this a number of times. When Silicon Labs and I founded that, I ended up hiring about 200 people. We went from 0 to 200 people in just a couple of years, and managed and have offices in almost every country in Asia that I was responsible for, in making sure that you get the right people, the professional people that can execute. That's always a battle, and so you're constantly refining, constantly interviewing, because you only survive if you have the best on your team.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. And so let's go big picture here as we're getting ready to close this thing off. Let's fast forward 5 years, right? You've figured out your onboarding, you figured out scaling. You are clearly this, improvement over what every single doctor's office is currently working with. What do you think the world looks like in 5 years in your space when practices really understand and are using and applying all of the tools and processes that you guys offer them? What do you think it looks like in 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, medicine in 5 years is nothing like it is today. That is for sure. What I would imagine is that every single physician is using an AI first strategy like AbbVie now. They are basically adding the human element to the patient encounter, and that's it. And all of the documentation, all of the data collection, they're using some type of AI assist for diagnosis and treatment. The battles people have with insurance companies, those are all behind us. That all gets automated in the back end. And so everything is different for the patient. So I think patients have access to care. I'm not gonna say I live in an altruistic world where everyone can get the treatments they want, but everyone can be diagnosed. There's no reason for you to say, I didn't know I had this, because diagnosis is going to become almost free in the future. What the challenge is treatments, and treatments will still cost money. Surgeries will still cost money. Drugs will still cost money, and so 50% of the cost of healthcare today will be pulled out. Maybe that gives us the ability to give more people, access to care. Who knows? We'll have to see how that plays out. But what we do know is that 50% of the cost of healthcare today is administrative in nature. AI eliminates that administration overhead. So what we see in the future, 5 years from now, will not be what it is practicing medicine. From an AdviNow standpoint, quite frankly, I hope I'm acquired by somebody by then. And, as we're revolutionizing healthcare and saving the world, making a couple billion would also be nice. And so we'll see how that plays out. But being part of a big organization that is revolutionizing healthcare for the good of society would also be a great outcome 5 years from now from a company standpoint.
Yeah, I'm super excited for it. And I guess once all that is going down here in the future, we'll see if prices fall, if the insurance companies find a way to capture that for themselves, if it's going to be an interesting game.
I I totally imagine there's some push and pull as we head down this path. Everybody's going to want to take the savings for their own. I mean, when AbbVie is adopted, the savings almost go directly to the doctor's office, right? That's why profitability goes up 1,000%. Is that going to remain that way? I don't know. We'll see, right? Competition does very interesting things in the marketplace. So doctors' offices that adopt AbbVie now will grow, patients will have better outcomes, insurance costs will go down because patients are treated better and they get better outcomes, right? All of those things will happen for a certain segment of the group. And for the groups that don't adopt AI, they'll continue down the spiral and then they'll need to be acquired and go bankrupt. Through that process, how much the insurance company can claw out of the doctors. I mean, every year they'll try to reduce how much they pay. I mean, the game will be started. And so we'll see. I'm curious to see how it plays out. That's for sure.
Yeah, well, we're definitely going to find out. So last kind of question. What kind of advice do you have for entrepreneurs just starting out, entrepreneurs who are in the early stages of growing their company? What can your experience kind of highlight and help them with?
Yeah, it's do the analytical work, right? There's a lot of startup CEOs that come into it and say, I've got this great idea, and it's going to change the world, and I'm just going to make it, and kind of like baseball fields in the middle of Iowa. I'm just going to build it, and they will come, right? Um, but the unfortunate reality is it very seldom works that way. You actually have to go out, get user feedback, get studies. I started AbbVie now with a time and motion study. It's incredibly painful. And as it pisses everyone off to sit in time exactly how long it takes them to do every single task. I mean, they look at you like you're some HR person going to fire them if they're slow, right? But the reality is, without that data, you end up creating what, quite frankly, thousands of vendors in the healthcare space have created. Things that think like they should work, but they don't really work, right? I mean, AI is the range in healthcare, and everyone says an ambient listening scribe saves the day. That's like a microphone in the doctor's office, and it just records everything the patient and doctor says and automatically turns it into doctor notes. Well, it's kind of like, the note taker we have on the Zoom call. But the unfortunate reality is that that's not the real problem. It's annoying for doctors to have to type. But that's not the real problem. The real problem is doctors are forced to be experts in insurance company rules. They're forced to be experts in the regulatory changes that happen every year at a state level, a county level, and a national level on what gets paid for, what doesn't get paid for, what has liability, what doesn't have liability, who's in the White House, so does the word transgender exist? All of these ridiculous things that doctors, quite frankly, shouldn't care about is the problem. And AbbVie now, AI first solution is the only company out there that is actually solving the real problem. I don't want your doctor to care about what the insurance company thinks. I don't want your doctor to care about what the national politics of the day is. I just want them to find a way to help that patient. And that, quite frankly, is what doctors want to do. So, so do the work, figure out exactly what the real problem is. and solve that problem, and you'll be very successful.
Excellent advice. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We're hopeful and looking forward to a nice 10-figure plus exit for you here in the future, and more importantly than the money is the impact that you make on the world. Healthcare is it's an industry where there's so much waste and so much potential for doing a better job. And it sounds like, you guys are able to at least equip doctors with, the tools to do that. And that's a really exciting thing. So,
Totally. We can make the world a better place, and it really, keeps me driven to get up in the morning and make it happen.
yeah, 100%. Well, thanks so much for joining us. It was a great conversation, and we look forward to seeing where you guys go.
Thanks a lot, Greg. I
Have a
appreciate
good
it.
one.
All right, you too.